Look, I need to tell someone about this because honestly, everyone's acting like I'm the villain here, and I'm starting to think the whole world has lost its mind. I'm Cassidy. I'm 27, and my life just completely fell apart over something that happened years ago in college. Like, years ago. But apparently that doesn't matter to anyone. So me and Garrett have been together for 5 years. 5 whole years. I basically built this man from the ground up, okay? When I met him, he was this quiet, conservative guy who barely knew how to dress himself properly. I mean, he was sweet and all, but he needed serious work. I taught him how to be social, how to network at work events, what to wear, how to talk to people. Before me, he'd spend weekends playing video games with his buddies like some teenager. I fixed all that. I work in an office doing administrative stuff, nothing fancy, but I'm good with people. Garrett does something with computers. Honestly, I never really paid attention to the details because it's boring. But he makes decent money. The important thing is that we had this perfect thing going. Everyone always said we were relationship goals. I made sure of that. Here's the thing about relationships that most women don't understand. You have to be strategic. You can't just let guys do whatever they want or they'll walk all over you. So yeah, I kept track of things. Like when Garrett wanted to hang out with his college friends, I'd suddenly have this family emergency or work crisis that needed his attention. Not because I'm controlling, but because priorities matter. A good boyfriend puts his girlfriend first, period. I also made sure we shared everything. I mean, I needed to know he wasn't hiding anything from me, so I'd check his phone sometimes, just to make sure everything was okay between us. And honestly, he never had anything interesting on there anyway. Meanwhile, I kept my phone private because I handle a lot of sensitive work stuff and family drama he doesn't need to stress about. That's just being considerate. Our social life was perfect too. I planned everything. Date nights, couple hangouts, family dinners. Garrett's not really a planner, so I took charge. I made sure we looked good together on social media, that we went to the right places, hung out with the right people. I even helped him pick better friends. Some of his old college buddies were just holding him back with their immature attitudes. Financially, we had a great system. Garrett covered most of our shared expenses, rent, dates, groceries, because honestly, he makes more than me. And that's what good boyfriends do. I was saving my money for our future, for wedding stuff, for emergencies. I'm not stupid with money like some girls. I was being responsible while he handled the day-to-day stuff. The wedding planning was going amazing. I had everything figured out, the venue, the dress, the whole vision. Garrett mostly just agreed with whatever I wanted, which was perfect because I have way better taste than him anyway. All our friends were so jealous of how put together we were. I had trained him well over the years. He'd ask before making plans, he'd check with me about purchases, he'd prioritize our relationship over everything else. That's what real love looks like. I thought I had everything under control. We were less than a month away from the engagement party, and I was feeling so confident about us. I'd look at other couples and honestly feel sorry for them. Like the way some women just let their boyfriends run wild, hanging out with whoever, doing whatever, it was embarrassing. They clearly didn't understand how to maintain a relationship properly. Between us, I was pretty proud of what I'd built with Garrett. He was dependable, loyal, financially stable, and completely devoted to me. I'd molded him into the perfect boyfriend, and soon he'd be the perfect husband. I never doubted that we'd make it to the altar and beyond. Then wedding planning started getting really intense, and honestly, Garrett began showing some weird attitudes. Like suddenly he had opinions about everything. The flowers, the music, the guest list. Stuff he'd never cared about before. I think the pressure was getting to him because he started questioning some of my decisions, which was totally unlike him. I had to remind him a few times that I'm obviously better at this stuff than he is. I mean, what guy knows about wedding planning? But I did it in a nice way, like joking about how men have no sense of style, or how he should just trust me since I'd been dreaming about this day way longer than he had. Just normal couple teasing, but apparently he was being sensitive about everything. Work was stressing him out too, which made him even more difficult to deal with. He'd come home tired and not want to talk about wedding stuff, which was ridiculous because this is supposed to be the most important time in our lives. When he'd try to zone out watching TV or whatever, I'd have to create little situations to get his attention back on what actually mattered. Like, I'd suddenly remember something urgent we needed to discuss about the wedding, or I'd need help with something that couldn't wait. I started noticing he was getting weird about his phone too. Not like he was hiding anything, but he'd put it face down during dinner or take it with him to the bathroom. Totally suspicious behavior. When I'd casually ask to see something on it, he'd get defensive and say he was right there if I needed to look something up. Like, why couldn't I just use his phone? We're supposed to share everything. His friends started having more influence on him too, which was annoying. They'd invite him out for drinks or to watch sports, and instead of automatically saying no like he used to, he'd actually consider it. I'd have to remind him that we had wedding stuff to do, or that I'd had a hard day and needed him home with me. Sometimes I'd tear up a little when explaining how stressed I was, and that usually worked. But the most irritating thing was how he started questioning our finances. Like asking why I wasn't contributing more to wedding costs when I was clearly saving money for our future together. He even suggested we should split things more evenly, which made no sense. I explained that his job pays better, and that traditionally, men handle the big expenses. Plus, I was doing all the emotional labor of planning everything, so the least he could do was handle the financial side. I could tell he was starting to feel insecure about stuff too. I'd mentioned how my college friends' boyfriends were doing, getting promotions, buying houses, planning amazing honeymoons, just as conversation, but he'd get all quiet and moody. It's not my fault that some guys are more ambitious than others. I was just trying to motivate him to reach his potential. Around this time, I started thinking maybe I should share more about my past with him. Not because I was hiding anything major, but because I wanted him to understand that he was lucky to have someone like me. I'd had plenty of options in college and could have ended up with anyone, but I chose him. I thought maybe, if he understood that, he'd appreciate me more and stop being so difficult about wedding planning. I began dropping little hints about my college days, just testing the waters. Nothing specific, just mentions about how different I used to be, how much I'd grown up, how much more serious I was now. I wanted to see how he'd react to the idea that I hadn't always been the conservative girlfriend he knew. Honestly, I thought it might make him a little jealous and remind him not to take me for granted. The whole dynamic was shifting though, and I didn't like it. Garrett was becoming less predictable, less easy to manage. He'd question things I said, want to discuss decisions instead of just going with my plans. And worst of all, he started setting these weird boundaries about needing space to think about stuff. Like, what was there to think about? We were getting married. Everything was already decided. I realized I needed to do something to get him back under control before the wedding. Something that would remind him exactly who he was dealing with and make him grateful for what he had. That's when I decided it was time for complete honesty between us. So last Friday, we're having our usual wine night at home, just relaxing after another crazy week of wedding planning. I'd been thinking about this for weeks, honestly, and I decided tonight was the night to really open up to Garrett. I wanted to show him how much I trusted him by sharing something really personal about my past. I started slow, just talking about how different we both were in college, how much we'd grown, how serious our relationship was compared to all the silly stuff we did when we were younger. Garrett was being sweet about it, saying how glad he was that we found each other when we were ready for something real. Then he asked about my dating history. Specifically asked. I'd been dropping hints for weeks that there were things he didn't know about my college days, so this was perfect. Finally, he was curious enough to ask the right questions. I told him I'd been through a really rough breakup junior year, which was totally true, by the way. This guy I'd been seeing for 8 months just completely blindsided me, cheated with some girl from his psych class. I was devastated, absolutely destroyed. I'd never felt that hurt before, and I kind of lost myself for a while. Garrett was being really understanding, holding my hand and everything. So I explained how after that breakup, I went through this phase where I was just trying to figure out who I was again. I was hurt and angry and honestly just wanted to feel good about myself. I told him I did some things I wasn't proud of, but that they helped me grow into the person I am today. He asked what kind of things, and I could tell he was genuinely curious, not judging. So I admitted that I'd explored a lot that month after the breakup. Like, a lot. I told him about how I'd connected with different people, tried new experiences, basically just lived completely differently than I ever had before or since. When he pressed for details, I was honest. I told him that in about a month, I'd been with 15 different people. Maybe more. Honestly, I stopped counting after 15 because it all kind of blurred together. It was just this crazy time where I was meeting people at parties, through friends, even just random encounters. I was dealing with my pain, in probably not the healthiest way, but I was young and hurt, and just trying to feel something other than heartbreak. I explained that it was completely different from anything I'd done before or since. It wasn't about love or relationships. It was just physical. Just me trying to rebuild my confidence and feel attractive again after being so completely rejected. I told him that's actually part of why what we have is so special, because I'd experienced that empty physical stuff and knew how much better real connection was. I thought he'd appreciate my honesty. I mean, I was literally sharing the most vulnerable time in my life with him, showing him that I trusted him enough to tell him something I'd never told anyone else. I was giving him this complete picture of who I was and how I'd become the woman he fell in love with. But instead of being grateful for my openness, he got all quiet and weird. Started asking more questions about details that honestly didn't matter. Like, what did it matter exactly when it happened, or who these people were? It was years ago, before I even knew him existed. I tried to explain that it was just a phase, that I'd grown past that completely, but he kept pushing for more information. I started getting frustrated because this wasn't going how I'd imagined at all. I'd expected him to maybe be a little surprised, sure, but then to appreciate that I was being so honest with him. Instead, he was acting like I'd done something wrong. I reminded him that this was before we even met, that it had nothing to do with our relationship, and that the fact that I was telling him about it proved how much I trusted him. But he just kept getting more distant as the conversation went on. By the end of the night, he said he needed to think about things, which honestly made no sense to me. What was there to think about? This was my past, not our present. I'd chosen him over everyone else, and this should have proved that even more. I woke up Saturday morning expecting Garrett to be over whatever weird mood he'd gotten into the night before, but if anything, he was worse. He was quiet during breakfast, barely looking at me, giving me these one-word answers when I tried to talk to him. I mean, seriously? We were supposed to be planning our future together, and he was sulking about something that happened years before I even knew him. I tried to be patient with him because I know men can be sensitive about this stuff, even though it's completely irrational. I explained again that this was ancient history, that I was a completely different person now, and that sharing it with him was actually a sign of how serious I was about our relationship. I told him that most women would never be that honest with their boyfriends, so he should feel grateful that I trusted him enough to be vulnerable. But instead of appreciating my honesty, he started asking all these weird questions, like, why hadn't I told him before? Why was I telling him now? Did anyone else know? It was like he was interrogating me instead of supporting me through sharing something difficult. I had to remind him that this wasn't about him. This was about me trusting him with my most private experiences. When I pointed out that he was being kind of judgmental, he got defensive and said he wasn't judging me. He just needed time to process. Process what, exactly? It's not like I cheated on him or lied to him. I just hadn't brought up every single detail of my college years because honestly, why would I? People don't usually share their entire sexual history with their partners. That's normal. I started getting really frustrated with his attitude because this was supposed to bring us closer together, and instead he was acting like I'd done something wrong. I reminded him that he'd specifically asked about my past, so I didn't understand why he was being weird about getting an honest answer. I told him that if he couldn't handle dating a woman who had experiences before him, maybe he wasn't as mature as I thought he was. That's when he said he needed space to think, which honestly made me panic a little. Not because I thought I'd done anything wrong, but because this was not how this conversation was supposed to go. I tried to explain that there was nothing to think about. This was just information about who I used to be, not who I am now. I asked him what exactly he was planning to think about, because it seemed pretty straightforward to me. He said he needed to understand why I'd kept this from him for 5 years, which was completely unfair. I hadn't kept anything from him. He'd never asked specific questions before. It's not like I was obligated to write out my entire sexual history for him when we started dating. That would have been weird and inappropriate. I tried to turn the conversation around and ask him about his past, but apparently he'd already told me about his 3 previous relationships years ago. Which was different, because his relationships were all serious and long-term, not just random hookups. But still, I pointed out that we'd both had lives before each other, and that's what made us who we were. By Sunday, he was still being distant and weird, barely talking to me, spending time on his laptop instead of focusing on us. I could tell he was overthinking everything, instead of just accepting that this was part of my journey to becoming the woman he fell in love with. I started getting really annoyed because we had wedding planning to do, vendor calls to make, decisions to finalize, and he was wasting time being moody about something that had literally nothing to do with our future together. I finally told him that if he was going to keep acting like this, maybe we needed to talk about whether he was actually ready to be married. Because marriage is about accepting your partner completely, including their past, and his reaction was showing me that maybe he wasn't as mature and understanding as I'd thought. I told him that his inability to handle my honesty was actually more concerning to me than anything I'd shared with him. That seemed to get his attention at least. But instead of snapping out of it like I expected, he just looked at me with this expression I couldn't read and said we needed to have a serious conversation about our relationship. Which honestly scared me, because serious conversations usually meant someone was about to do something stupid. When Garrett said we needed to have a serious conversation, I knew this had gotten completely out of hand. I mean, we're talking about ending our engagement over something that happened before we even met? It was absolutely insane. But I could tell from his tone that he wasn't just being dramatic. He was actually considering throwing away 5 years together. I tried to stay calm and rational while he explained his concerns, but honestly, everything he said just proved how unreasonable he was being. He said he felt like he didn't really know me, which was ridiculous because we'd been together for 5 years. He said he was questioning whether we were compatible, which made no sense because we'd been perfectly compatible until I decided to be honest with him. The worst part was when he said he needed to reevaluate our relationship. Like, what was there to reevaluate? I was still the same person I'd always been. The only thing that had changed was that now he knew more about my past, and apparently he couldn't handle that. I told him that his reaction was actually showing me who he really was, someone who would judge his fiancée for things that happened before they even met. I reminded him of everything we'd built together, all the plans we'd made, all the deposits we'd put down for the wedding. I asked him if he really wanted to throw all of that away because he couldn't accept that I'd had experiences before him. I pointed out that plenty of people have pasts and mature adults don't hold their partner's previous relationships against them. When that didn't seem to be working, I tried a different approach. I told him that his reaction was actually hurting me more than he realized. Here I'd trusted him with the most vulnerable part of my past, something I'd never shared with anyone, and instead of supporting me, he was making me feel ashamed of experiences that had helped shape me into the person he fell in love with. I explained that going through that difficult time in college had actually made me a better partner to him. It had taught me what I didn't want in relationships, what wasn't fulfilling, and how much more meaningful real love was. I told him that if anything, he should be grateful that I'd learned those lessons before we met, because it meant I could appreciate what we had even more. But he kept saying he needed time, which was driving me crazy. Time for what? To decide whether he could accept reality? To figure out whether he wanted to be with me or not? I told him that asking for time was basically holding our entire relationship hostage over something that had nothing to do with us. I started getting really emotional. Not because I thought I'd done anything wrong, but because I couldn't believe he was actually considering ending things over this. I told him that if he loved me the way he claimed to, this wouldn't matter to him. I said that his reaction was making me question whether he'd ever really accepted me for who I was, or whether he'd just been in love with some perfect image he'd created in his head. When he said he needed to stay somewhere else for a few days to think, I completely lost it. I told him that walking away was just proving that he wasn't ready for marriage. Because marriage is about working through problems together, not running away when things get difficult. I asked him how I was supposed to trust him in the future, if this was how he handled conflict. I reminded him that I'd been completely honest with him when I could have just kept this to myself forever. I said that his reaction was actually making me regret being open with him, because apparently honesty wasn't something he could handle. I told him that if he left now, he was basically punishing me for trusting him, which was completely unfair. But he still packed some clothes and said he'd call me in a few days. I watched him leave and honestly couldn't believe this was actually happening. 5 years of building a life together, and he was throwing it all away because he couldn't handle the fact that I'd had experiences before him. It was the most immature, insecure reaction I could have imagined, and it made me realize that maybe I'd been wrong about who he really was this whole time. It's been 6 months since everything fell apart, and honestly, I'm still processing how completely unfair this whole situation turned out to be. Garrett ended up calling off our engagement permanently, and apparently everyone thinks that was the right decision. Like, everyone. Even people who barely knew the details sided with him, which just proves how judgmental society still is about women who've had experiences. The worst part is watching how well he's doing now. He got promoted at work, he's been going to therapy, which honestly seems like overkill for this situation, and from what I hear through mutual friends, he's actually dating someone new already. Someone who apparently thinks his whole growth journey is amazing. It's honestly disgusting how quickly he moved on after 5 years together. Meanwhile, my life has been completely destroyed. I had to cancel our entire wedding, lose all those deposits, deal with explaining to everyone why we broke up. Do you know how humiliating it is to tell people that your fiancé left you because he couldn't handle your past? Most people just looked at me like there was more to the story, like I must have done something worse than just being honest about my college experiences. Work became impossible because apparently drama follows you everywhere. Some coworker's boyfriend heard about what happened through their friend group, Seed, and suddenly everyone in the office was looking at me weird and whispering. I ended up having to find a new job, which set me back financially just when I could least afford it. Without Garrett covering most of our shared expenses, I couldn't afford our apartment anymore. I had to move back in with my parents at 27 years old, which has been absolutely humiliating. They keep asking what really happened, like they can't believe Garrett would leave over just my college phase. Even my own family seems to think there must be more to the story. The absolute worst part, though, is seeing him with his new girlfriend on social media. She seems perfectly nice, which honestly makes it worse. Like, she's not even dramatically prettier than me or anything. She's just this normal girl who apparently appreciates all his personal growth and supports his therapy journey. It's like watching someone live the life that should have been mine, with the man I spent 5 years building up. All our mutual friends act like they're relationship goals now, which is honestly sickening. I spent 5 years teaching Garrett how to be a good boyfriend, and now this random girl gets to benefit from all my hard work. She gets the improved version of him that I created, while I'm back to square one trying to rebuild my entire life. I've tried dating, but it's been a disaster. Guys either want to know why my long-term relationship ended, which is impossible to explain without sounding bad, or they find out somehow and judge me for it. It's like I'm being punished over and over for something that happened years ago, something that had nothing to do with any of them. The financial situation has been the hardest part, though. I had to start over completely. New apartment, new job, rebuilding my savings. Meanwhile, Garrett gets to keep the life we built together, plus his promotion, plus his perfect new relationship. It's like he was rewarded for abandoning me when I needed support the most. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just kept my mouth shut about college. But then I remember that I was just being honest and trusting, and his reaction proved that he was never really the man I thought he was. If he'd really loved me, my past wouldn't have mattered to him. The fact that it did just shows how shallow and insecure he actually was. I keep hearing through people that he tells everyone he's grateful for the experience, and that it helped him grow as a person. Which is honestly the most insulting thing of all. Like, I'm not some life lesson for him to learn from. I was his fiancée, someone who loved him and trusted him with my most private experiences, and he turned me into some cautionary tale about knowing yourself before committing. Now I'm 27, single, living with my parents, starting over completely, while he gets to be the hero of his own story who dodged a bullet and found true love. Everyone acts like he made some wise, mature decision, when really he just proved that he was too insecure to handle being with a woman who'd had experiences before him. But apparently, that's not how anyone else sees it, and I'm the one who has to live with the consequences of his immaturity forever.